It's time for the North Idaho Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
And if that doesn't get you fired up to break down District 1 and 2 athletics, then there may not be any hope for you. Welcome in. It's the North Idaho Prepcast at IdahoSports.com. I'm Brandon Baney, joined as always by my partner in crime, Ryan Scaggs. What's going on, Scaggs?
Dude, no slight to our man Paul, but I miss Wayne Zubak.
So last year for season 1, we had Wayne Zubak, who is a great broadcaster. And he was a broadcaster for IdahoSports.com. He recorded the intro, and it was cool. It definitely bumped, and it was a good jam. And then Wayne moved. He moved all the way to North Carolina, so he's not with us anymore. I mean, that sounded bad. He is.
If this was the Dan Lebitard show, I think that's a $50 fine for killing somebody. But yeah,
he is no longer with IdahoSports.com because he lives in North Carolina now. Although he said he's going to fly back every once in a while and maybe can help out here and there. So he's not completely out of the picture. But so we had to get a new liner, refresh, season 2, all that stuff. And if I didn't ask the boss, Paul Kingsbury, to voice it, then he would have been very upset. So that's why I went with that. And nobody cares. This is all behind the scenes stuff. They're like, can we start talking about North Idaho athletics?
Yeah, it was just tell me about what the volleyball and football stuff's going on right now, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's start with football. Let's start with the game you were at last week, Ryan, for North Idaho game night on IdahoSports.com. Lakeland was playing Post Falls in a very close, very competitive ball game. Post Falls ends up getting the win.
No, Lakeland.
Sorry. Oh my gosh. Yeah, sorry. Lakeland got
fine.
2 weeks ago. Lakeland nearly knocked off Coeur d'Alene. This time they do knock off Post Falls. This has been, I think, one of the more incredible stories of the year in the entire state is Lakeland really gangbusters.
Yeah, and we had 4 lead changes early on in that game, and then Lakeland, what looked like they were going to coast towards the end, they pulled away and they were up by 3 scores, with just about 7 minutes left in the game, and Post Falls came back and made it a 1-possession game, and we were pressing late, and that Lakeland defense stood the test. But the stat line we were talking, Brandon Fury and myself, Brandon was my color commentator on the call with the game, and it was the gaudiest of rushing stat lines that I may have seen in a high school football game in a long time. I believe Jake Bustamante, the running back from Post Falls, had I think it was like 22 carries for 209 yards. And then but that wasn't even the best rushing stat of the night. He had a couple TDs as well. But then you had John Cornish from Lakeland, who had 29 carries for 223 yards, and then he had over 127 return yards, 2 touchdowns for Cornish on the night as well. And then, you had Thomas Calder, who was over 125 all-purpose yards as well, with a couple TDs from him. So it was just a crazy offensive night. Post Falls just couldn't get the passing game going. That Lakeland defense was pretty stingy. Obviously, Post Falls was able to kind of rush at will, but I think it was mainly because they spread out so much. It just left Lakeland with few guys in the box. But great game. I mean, hats off to Lakeland. They are a great story, and they play with a chip on their shoulder. It's kind of like us against the world type of attitude when they hit the field. You can tell they're. But the one thing that really doesn't get talked about much is that Lakeland offensive line is as big as any offensive line in the state. I mean, they got some dudes up there like Preston Jeffs, the big tackle for Lakeland. I mean, he's over 3 bills. Like there's some dudes up front, and he can move. There's some dudes up front for that Lakeland offensive line that just absolutely paved the way. I mean, you say road grader. I mean, this is like a buzzsaw running through a forest. It's crazy what these guys can do up front.
And there's the podcast title, Buzzsaw through a forest. Okay. Sorry.
You're all good.
Yeah. Lakeland was up 31-14 in the fourth quarter, right? And Post Falls made a huge comeback, just fell short. So
Couple big turnovers from Lakeland in the fourth quarter. Something we haven't seen from them this year was they turned the ball over twice, I believe, on back-to-back possessions, and Post Falls was able to capitalize both times.
Yeah, so they were able to get back in the game and end up coming up just short. Let's talk about the other games that happened in the Inland Empire League, where I think the game of the night probably was another game we had on IdahoSports.com. Game night on the Palouse with Garrison Hardy and Jason Hansen. Lewiston and Sandpoint. Through regulation, they're tied at 32 all. Lewiston gets the ball first in overtime. Drew Hottinger throws a 4-yard touchdown pass to Jackson Lathan, and then they go for 2.
Well, that was on fourth down, I believe, as well. They got the touchdown on fourth down.
Yes. Yeah, it was crazy. So they line up, they go for 2. Hottinger finds Braden Rice for the 2-point conversion. So Lewiston's up 8, 40-32. Now it's Sandpoint's turn. They get the ball. Max Frank scores from 2 yards out. And then they try a 2-point conversion. Parker Pettit doesn't make it. And so Lewiston wins in overtime by 2, 40-38. What a wild contest this was.
It was shades of last year's game, too. That was a back-and-forth affair as well up in Sandpoint. But, an amazing high school football game. We had a couple great games up north last week. That being, I think, the creme de la creme of the week. Was a great ball game of 2 great teams. It's kind of funny. You look at who's receiving votes in the polls and everything, and you look at Sandpoint and they're 1-3 and they're getting votes still in the poll. And it's just like, but you look at their schedule and you're kind of scratching your head. Cause it's like, well, they've played some really tough teams that, they don't have many games left either. That's the other part, that Sandpoint, obviously they lost one of their non-leagues. So they're on the back end of their schedule the next few weeks. They're done in 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. In my personal poll, because I vote in the media poll every week, I still have Sandpoint number 2. I've had them number 2 the whole season because I look at the teams around the state and I really do think Sandpoint talent-wise matches up with anybody. You can't just look at the results and the record. It would be nice if they, won one of these games against 5A opponents. I guess we got spoiled last year when they, swept or almost swept the 5A IEL. But I'm not worried about Sandpoint at all. Correct me if I'm wrong, but last year in the playoffs when they played Blackfoot in the semifinals, didn't it come down to like overtime and a 2-point conversion? Did Parker Pettit score?
Yep. Yeah, it sure did. That was a great game.
Yeah, they tried to dial that up again on Friday night, and Parker says, that's all right. As long as I get that in the playoffs, then I'm good, right?
Yeah, and the thing too is it's a different play call from what Parker scored on last time on Friday night, but it's kind of one of those games that you look at, it puts the kids in a position to where they can say, hey, we've been there before. We've done this before. And it obviously didn't work out into their favor. Parker got tripped. You watch that replay of that play. If he doesn't get his ankle swiped, he's in. He's basically almost walking into the end zone. The defender from Lewiston, the D end from that defensive left side, just got enough clipping of that foot when he was planting to cut back up in the hole to trip him up, and ended up a yard short of the end zone.
Yeah, it was a wild finish for sure. Coeur d'Alene played Woodinville, the Woodinville Falcons from Washington. They get a 28-14 win. The game was 0-0 at halftime. All the scoring occurred in the second half. How crazy is that?
Yeah, it's like they had to, the bus leg from Woodinville had to wake up, and then Coeur d'Alene just finally finding their offense. But that's been Coeur d'Alene's MO this year, is that it takes them a good half of football to come around. They did it against Lakeland, and they did it again this last week against Woodinville, and you saw it in their game against Sandpoint as well. That was a close game at half in that one. So Coeur d'Alene's, it takes them a while to kind of come around and get their feet under them, I guess. I don't know how else you would quote it, but they're still a dangerous team because that defense is just so dang good. They're physical up front, and they fly around with the ball. So they're going to be in every ball game. It's just going to be what team is going to be able to keep Coeur d'Alene shut down on offense for all 4 quarters.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting when all of these teams start playing each other. We've got one more week of non-conference action and some pretty interesting, Idaho Washington matchups. Post Falls is going to play Mount Spokane.
That's
Coeur d'Alene's going to play Union High. They're usually
That's going to be, historically Union's a great team. Mount Spokane's a great team out of the GSL as well. So that's a tough task for the Trojans to go up against the Wildcats this week.
Yeah, definitely. And then Lewiston this week will be playing Moscow in their annual rivalry game. That's actually going to be our game night on the Palouse on IdahoSports.com. Lewiston at Moscow. Ryan, you will be at Lake City for an audio-only broadcast on Friday night as Sandpoint takes on Lake City. And so that should be an interesting matchup as well. And this is something I wanted to talk about because it got me thinking today. I was doing another podcast, our Treasure Valley Prepcast. And again, we have Prepcasts for every region of the state. So if you want to get caught up on what else is happening around the state, definitely check out all those Prepcasts. You can do that at IdahoSports.com, wherever you download your podcasts, the IdahoSports.com YouTube channel, as well as the Facebook page. So we were talking about the 5A playoffs because we were looking at, well, how many teams from Boise are going to get in and how many teams from up north? And the way the 5A playoffs work is it's all kind of a predetermined bracket, and each league gets certain amounts of bids, and then there's like 2 at-large spots. It's a 12-team field. So long story short, the North gets 2 teams automatically in, and possibly a third could get in with the at-large bid, right? Because there's 3 teams we're looking at: Post Falls, Coeur d'Alene, and Lewiston, and they're all really good and really talented teams. The way they determine the at-large bid, though, it's not using the Max Preps ranking. The way they determine, who gets those 2 at-large bids is winning percentage against other 5A schools in Idaho or out-of-state opponents that have 5A enrollment. And that's where having this combined Inland Empire League and basically having the 5As play the 4As is kind of a detriment to those 5A schools where, Lewiston got a great win over Sandpoint on Friday night.
Doesn't help them.
It's not going to count for anything when it's time.
Same with the Moscow game. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't help them at all. And so these schools are doing what they can, right? Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls are scheduling a lot of Washington teams, right? Coeur d'Alene played Rocky Mountain and Rigby. But for Lewiston, especially, I think they end up playing, 2 of the 3 4A teams, and it's hard for them to keep up when like the Boise schools, for example, they're playing a 5A team every week because the league's so big. So that's where those 5A 4A matchups can be kind of a detriment.
And that's, something too that was discussed. There was discussion. It's happened 2 or 3 times about ending the rivalry between Lewiston and Clarkston because for Clarkston, it hurts them because they lose a non-league Washington game to play that game against a much larger Idaho school. Lewiston's playing a much smaller Washington school in that game. Lewiston already playing Moscow too. They played Pendleton, which doesn't have 4A enrollment or 5A enrollment in the state of Idaho. I believe they're only one besides the Capital game. Their only other game that's non-league that has the enrollment levels was the team from Utah that they played against. And, so like the scheduling there, I understand when you're up north, you kind of got to do what you have to do. But some of that stuff, Lewiston may have to start looking at playing some of the Tri-Cities teams or playing some of the Spokane schools again, if they can get them on their schedule. Like Post Falls playing Mount Spokane. Mount Spokane's right on that border. They're a 4A school or they're a 3A school in Washington, but they're one of the bigger 3A teams. So I think they would fall into the 5A classification in Idaho. But playing Sunnyside's a 4A school in Washington, so they're going to hit the enrollment numbers there for sure. But yeah, it's just with Post Falls the way they scheduled versus Lewiston the way they scheduled, there's some big differences I think in the non-league opponent.
For sure. And so it's going to be the conference games, of course, will take on even greater importance because of that.
Absolutely.
We all remember what happened last year where there was that 3-way tie and Post Falls ended up being the odd team out. And then they didn't get an at-large bid. What's that?
They had the 3-legged sack race on alternating Sundays.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they had that.
The Denslow Cup.
Yes. So I we could be headed to something similar again this year. This is just my personal opinion. They don't really mandate the combined IEL for football, right? The schools have the liberty, like Coeur d'Alene is only playing Sandpoint and Lakeland, right? They don't have to play Moscow. In the other sports, it's mandated. You will play, for soccer, volleyball, basketball. It's just my opinion. I don't think it's working. Like, we should just get rid of it.
What would make more sense is for the 4A to play the 3A teams because they don't have the same rule, and there's only 2 3A schools now. I mean, scheduling wise, it's not as big of a discrepancy on enrollment sizes and everything else too. I mean, this starts the enrollment question again, like how we talked about reclassification. But yeah, I mean, I can remember when I was in school though, Lewiston was part of the Southern Idaho Conference. They were the only 5A school in North Idaho, and they were playing the Boise teams every week. So I mean that was, obviously I think only a 2 or 3 year stretch they had to do that. But I mean, we could be looking at that again in the near future, I think, for some of these North Idaho teams, especially if Post Falls ends up splitting into 2 high schools in the next 5 years.
Yeah. So again, my opinion, we tried it. To me, it didn't really work because I mean, what's happening now in soccer is it's so confusing. It's like in girls soccer, the games the 4A's host are the ones that count, and the games that the 5A's host don't count. But then there was smoke and matches got canceled, and it's a mess. It's just a mess to try and figure out, what counts as a league game and what doesn't. And it happened in baseball and softball with rainouts, and then you had different, teams playing different amounts of league games, and and it hurts the 4A teams now that everything is seeded with Max Prep's rankings as well. Yeah. So I think it's a disservice to everybody. And now I'll get off my stump and we can move on.
We'll have to have a special Prepcast of just doing the classification thing again, because it's rearing its ugly head once again, I think, and we're only halfway through the fall season.
Yes, definitely. All right. Other games of note that happened from the past week. Really 3A, 2A kind of went as we expected things to go. You had a big battle in the White Pine League in 8-man football, Kamei against Clearwater Valley. Clearwater Valley had the lead after 3 quarters, but Kamei gets 2 short touchdown runs from quarterback David Clute, and they end up pulling out the win 34-22. And so now Kamei and Prairie are tied at the top of the White Pine standings. And wouldn't you know it, Ryan? They're playing each other on Friday.
Yeah, wouldn't you know it? I said that, hey, that's the game to watch this year in the White Pine League too. But yeah, no, that's that conference is, Prairie quietly kind of sitting there on the outside. And they're hovering in the rankings, obviously, but I don't want to say that they're getting. This might upset some Pirate fans saying this a little bit, but I think that I don't want to say resting on their laurels, but they can't take this Kamei team for granted. This Kamei team's pretty dang good. They play a good brand of 8-man football too. Their physical is all get out. So I mean, it's going to be a great game. I think we're gonna see who wins that game. Obviously, I say is going to be how the conference goes this year. So basically, it's essentially a game almost playing for home field advantage in the playoffs. I mean, if you really look at it that way, until you get to the semifinals, they're going to be hosting or playing, playoff games as the home team, depending on how things roll. You're not taking bus trips down south for the postseason.
That's right. And the 1A D1 bracket, it's all determined by Max Prep's rankings. The conference champs automatically get in, and then everything else is just the next best teams according to Max Prep. So, there's a good chance that 5 teams from the White Pine make it into the playoffs, certainly. And it's an important matchup. The White Pine to me is a little more even this year. In years past, Prairie has kind of been way out in front, and then there's been parity. I think the pack has closed the gap on Prairie.
For sure.
I look at Prairie, Clearwater Valley, Kamei, Potlatch. Genesee led this game 16-0 after 1 quarter and 16-12 at halftime. Now Prairie ends up winning 50-22, but a big key for Genesee there. And whoever thought that Genesee and Lapwai would be at the bottom of the conference standings, both 0-3 in conference. That just tells you how good the White Pine's been this year. Genesee, the key for them is their 4-year starting quarterback Angus Jordan has been battling injuries all year long. Well, he was back playing on Friday night, and Genesee had the lead while he was at the controls. Well, he has to leave with an injury, and that's when Prairie takes advantage. And really, so the margin for error is thin. And I only bring this up to say that Prairie was pushed by a Genesee team that, when you look at it, is 0-3 in league. And so health is important for every team up there, but also, I think on any given night, anybody can beat anybody.
The one team that we're kind of ignoring, I think, out of the North, we talk a lot about White Pine, but Mullen St. Regis, there they are again right now, kind of floating around, like hovering near the top 5. And, that team continues to have success. And I know that coach was like, oh, we might take our lumps this next year. We're not going to be as good as we've been. But, I mean, this team, they're scrappy as all get out. And I think that they'll make the playoffs this year for sure. Obviously, they may get a win or two. I mean, nobody really wants to look at them, and I think they get slighted a little bit because they're further north in the White Pine League. But they're a team that could make some noise, I think, for sure too.
Yeah,
I think we look past them and kind of look at like the Potlatches and the middle teams in the White Pine. But yeah, Mullen St. Regis, we know what Kendrick can do too. Obviously, they're in D2, but there's some teams out there that are floating around that can definitely make some noise up north that don't get talked about too much.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because the D2 playoffs, it's all predetermined, right? The amount of bids from each district and where they're at on the bracket line, it's all predetermined. And so I've already started peeking at that D2 bracket and kind of figuring out where teams are going to slot in at. And for Mullen St. Regis, their district used to be, a 3-team conference, but now that they added Wallace and Lakeside this year, it's a 5-team league, which means they got a second bid to the playoffs. So the big story from that league is that the Wampus Cats from Clark Fork are finally going to get a chance to make the playoffs. The last several years they've gone like 7-1, 6-2 with that like lone loss being to Mullen St. Regis, but because the league only got one playoff bid, I mean, that was it. And so I'm really excited to see. And of course, they still have to beat Wallace and Lakeside a second time, but right now it sure looks like Clark Fork is the second best team. And so,
yeah,
exciting.
And it's kind of everybody chasing Kendrick right now because what they're doing to teams is just absolutely, they're a buzzsaw. I mean, like they are just rolling and a well-oiled machine. And, Coach Hobart's got his guys just absolutely primed, I think, for another title run. They're my state favorite as far as championship run for this year and probably the foreseeable future for the next couple of years too. But that team is good. They're deep. But I like the Wampus Cats. I do. I look at some of these teams up north that got slided. We've been talking about it for the last couple of years. Like, why can't this team get in? They deserve at least a shot at it. And here they are. I think they're going to get it this year. And, it's something I think it's been well deserved for them. Obviously, you don't want to say things are handed to anybody, but man, if any team has earned like their right to play in the playoffs this year, I think what Clark Fork's been able to do the last couple of years is really noteworthy.
Yes, they're a fun team to watch for sure. And so last point on this, and then we'll move into other sports. Mullen St. Regis, the way the bracket's set up, they would get a first round bye, and then they would be on the opposite side of the bracket as Kendrick. So the path is there. It's not hard to, and Coach Stetson Spooner is going to hate me for saying this because he's like, we don't need to be
looking ahead.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you can look at that bracket and you can see a path where, Mullen St. Regis could definitely get on a run. I really do like their chances. I wanted to bring up the creative scheduling that Mullen St. Regis has done this year. They played, obviously, with St. Regis being in Montana, they have some connections to Montana schools. They played Superior, the defending 8-man champion from Montana, in their season opener. And they picked up another non-conference game this week. It wasn't originally on the schedule. They kind of did this on the fly, but they're going to travel to Eureka, Montana on Friday night, which is about 30 miles from the Canadian border. It's way up there. It's like in, Bonner's Ferry territory. They're going to go there to basically meet in the middle. They're going to play another 8-man power from Montana, Chinook. Have you ever heard of Chinook High School? Right?
I have, actually, because I coached with Dan Lucier from Superior.
Oh, from Superior, yeah.
So he's told me all the stories about playing 8-man football in the state of Montana.
Okay, cool. So you know what their mascot is?
I don't.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Okay.
I've heard of the team, but I didn't know their mascot. No.
Okay, so Chinook, they're always in these contests for most unique, mascot and most unique team name. And David Letterman even gave him a shout out one time. When I first started broadcasting in Montana, I had to broadcast some Chinook playoff games. They are the Chinook Sugar Beaters. And look at this logo here. I'm gonna throw this up on the screen. Check out that
sugar beets, like Southern Idaho sugar beets, but yeah, okay. No, I'm following you.
Yeah. So if you're watching the video version of this on the IdahoSports.com YouTube channel or Facebook page, you can see the Chinook logo I threw up on the screen. I love that the legs are the actual beaters.
And the head is an angry sugar beet. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And he's got the like the gear things to turn the beaters on the bottom too, like that he's holding.
He's got the cranks in each hand. Yeah.
That's up there with like Camas Washington's the paper makers. Tillamook, Oregon was the cheese makers.
Yeah.
And then you have Orfino Maniacs, obviously. I was a bantam, which is a chicken. So, I mean, from Clarkston. So, there's some interesting mascots. We could have that's a summer show, I think, of doing random mascots from around the Northwest. But
yeah, for sure. But I had to throw that up there. Yeah, that's
a good, I think that's a good pick. I mean, smart move on his part to pick up the extra game too and get his kids some more playing time. But yeah, I know they had a big win last week too, did Mullen St. Regis. So, that team's on a roll too. So take note.
Caleb Ball has been playing very well at quarterback.
Yes,
and that offensive line has really come along for Mullen St. Regis as well. So good luck to the Tigers as they travel to Montana for a non-conference battle this week. All right, Ryan, let's talk volleyball next. I know you've been kind of keeping tabs on everything. The annual Linda Sheridan tournament took place in Spokane last week, and a lot of Idaho teams went over and competed. There was the border battle as well in Pomeroy. And there's been, again, for volleyball, it's kind of like we saw in girls basketball last year, where there's like 3 really good teams that all just beat up on each other in that 5A division.
Yeah, but the funny thing is that you look at the 5A division, Lakeland, a 4A team's right in the mix with them. I mean, they're 16-7 overall in the year, and I mean, Lakeland's right in the mix with the 5A and 4A schedule. Post Falls beat Lakeland in 4 sets. And over Lakeland, and Kylie Monday had a huge game, 10 kills, 20 assists, 5 blocks, and 15 digs, and 7 aces in that game. I mean, that's a pretty gaudy stat. If you follow volleyball, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And then they turned and lost in 5 sets to Mount Spokane from Spokane, and yeah, that's I mean, Post Falls is playing really, really good volleyball right now too. You look at like Lake City, they're out there, they're doing well. The Coeur d'Alene got a big win over Moscow in 4 sets. Maddie Simons had 28 kills and 16 digs in that win. So, obviously it's kind of separating a little bit. There's a little bit of a line that's starting to form now within conference, especially the 2 other 4A schools, Moscow and Sandpoint, have dropped a little bit, and the better teams have risen to the top. But Post Falls and Lake City are looking super competitive as we get closer to the end of the year. And Lakeland already clinched the number 1 seed to regionals, so in 4A.
Yeah, pretty impressive. And I know Post Falls was the preseason favorite coming in. Coeur d'Alene really started hot. They've kind of hit a wall lately. I know Maddie Simmons missed some time with an injury, but she's obviously back now. Yeah, you mentioned Lakeland leading the 4A classification. At the smaller levels, really Bonners Ferry is the team up north, right? And they've got a strong volleyball tradition at Bonners Ferry. Timberlake's 0-10. They've really had a hard time getting going.
As Lee Corso would say, not so fast, my friend. Genesis Prep is 8-2 in volleyball, if I'm not mistaken, right now. And they beat Timberlake. I know Timberlake's struggling right now, but that's a 1A school going up and beating a 3A school. Yes. Genesis Prep beating Timberlake the other night in 3 sets. So Genesis Prep looking pretty solid in 1A volleyball as well.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I was going to get there. I was just going.
Sorry.
No. You're good. I was going classification by classification. So Bonners Ferry 3A, 2A right now. St. Mary's and Kellogg. That's going to be where it's decided. 1A D1. You mentioned G Prep, and Wallace always has a good volleyball program too. So you got to keep an eye on Wallace. And then at the D2 level, really Clark Fork has traditionally been the strong premier program, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and they've been continuing that. And Genesis Prep, though, I believe they beat Wallace the other night, too, this week already. So Genesis Prep's got a couple of league wins under their belt and a 3A win under their belt. So the Jags they're playing good, and they're pretty scrappy and fairly young, if I'm not mistaken, too, with that lineup. So, definitely a team, if they get on a roll later in the season, they could make a little noise maybe or surprise some folks down the stretch.
Yeah, G Prep always seems to be eternally young. They always seem to be young, but Yes. And then I should mention as well in District 2, right? Of course, at the 1A D1 level, you've got Troy, Potlatch, Genesee, and Logos has really come on all of a sudden.
4 of the 5 ranked teams are from that conference. Yeah.
And to me, Troy is still kind of a step ahead of everybody. They're so good, and they've got such a great Coach Blazard does such a great job with Troy there. And then the D2 White Pine League, really Kendrick has come on strong. St. John Bosco started hot out of the gates. They've kind of faltered a little bit recently. Kendrick looks like the team to beat up. They're 7-0 in league, 8-1 overall. The nice thing is that this year there's no half bids up north for the 1As, right? And we talked about last year where Wallace and Clark Fork both won their districts and then had to go win a play-in game just to get to state and weren't able to. And that was kind of, I thought, unfair. But now the district champ from District 1 automatically gets to go. And then 2 teams from the White Pine League get to go to state as well. So we'll have 3 teams from up north in each classification. So that'll be nice for the 1As.
Great.
Yep. All right, let's talk soccer. What's been standing out to you? There's been some wild stuff going on in the IML, but I know you've been keeping an eye on the bigger schools as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to stay with the IML, Coeur d'Alene Charter on the boys' side beat Priest River 2-0. The other gaudy one, Coeur d'Alene Charter on the girls' side, continues to run roughshod through people, beating Priest River 16-0. That's I mean, we could be talking about a football score on Friday night. Wouldn't surprise me, but the Coeur d'Alene Charter doesn't play football, so it'd be somebody else against Priest River. But yeah, but those stat lines, at least from the IML, stand out. Initially, the Coeur d'Alene Charters, on the boys' side, the IML has been pretty competitive with Coeur d'Alene Charter and Bonners Ferry. Timberlake on the girls' side has been playing really well as well. But I mean, obviously, we talk Coeur d'Alene Charter, and what they're doing is just nothing short of pretty dang impressive. And you look at 3A state, it's going to be something else.
Yeah, you've got basically kind of a big 4 and really from the 4 different regions where it's Coeur d'Alene Charter from the north, and we're talking girls soccer here. Coeur d'Alene Charter from the north, Fruitland, the defending champs from the Boise area. You've got the Sun Valley Community School from the Magic Valley, and then Sugar Salem over in the east. 4 kind of big powers. They're all going to collide and converge, and so that's going to be really fascinating to watch. Boys Intermountain League, Coeur d'Alene Charter has had like a ton of draws lately. Have you seen this? They're 4-2 and 4 in conference. Yeah. It's been really interesting.
I was looking at the Coeur d'Alene Press this morning. I'm like, that's got to be like, is that a typo? Like, how do you have 4 draws? And they've all happened within like the last 2 weeks. So
yes. Yeah. So they've drawn with St. Mary's and Timberlake, and both of their matchups with Orofino this year ended in draws, which is just puzzling to me. Orofino is kind of quietly put together a nice season, 3-3 and 2 in the league. But really it's Timberlake and Bonners Ferry, right? Those are the 2 powers. Timberlake has just the 1 draw. Otherwise they're unbeaten. Bonners Ferry is 5-1, and they play tonight, Ryan. So we will recap that next week on the Prepcast.
As I look out my window and I'm like, man, you get sloppy field soccer tonight. That's gonna be some fun going on. I don't know where that game's at tonight. So, but yeah, it should be a good game. And you look at the girls' side, the boys' side. Staying, if you go to bigger schools, Sandpoint beating Lakeland 8-0, and Sandpoint quietly, they're undefeated. I mean, they're 9-0-3 on the season, and they played to a draw with Coeur d'Alene earlier this week too. So the Bulldogs are having another quiet but successful season up there in Sandpoint.
Yes, and of course the Sandpoint girls swept Moscow in the regular season series, getting a little revenge from last year's district final when I jinxed the Sandpoint girls. But
yeah, and then they beat Lakeland last night 5-1. So it's Sandpoint girls are playing well also. So it'll be obviously the district brackets are set. Pretty much number 1 seeds in volleyball and soccer are all clinched on the 4A side. So
yep. Yeah. And then 5A, Lake City girls, again, getting no respect statewide. They should be the number 1 team in the polls. I don't know what's I don't know what
people are thinking, but yeah.
I mean, it's a coaches poll, so I guess most of the 5A coaches are in Boise and they probably vote with what they know, right?
Pat each other on the back. Yeah.
Yeah, Lake City boys also looking very good. And then Coeur d'Alene is right there too.
Super competitive.
Cooper Prohaska is always like getting hat tricks or getting 2 goals. And then he plays football too for Coeur d'Alene, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Kind of cool. For sure.
He's got a decent foot on him too. He can kick pretty well on the gridiron. So
Yeah.
it's good to see. Like I think the balance is showing. In leagues, obviously we're seeing Lake City run away with things and Coeur d'Alene Charter running away with things on the girl side, but the balance outside of the outliers has been fairly there this year, which has been kind of nice to see that the competitive balance is kind of evening out a little bit amongst the schools.
Definitely. All right. And then last note, district golf scheduled for today. As we are recording this, it's Thursday, September 29th. That might be postponed. The nice thing is they've got a week to get it in, right? State is next week. So they could definitely push it back to the weekend or even Monday. I know some districts around the state are doing their district tournament on Monday as well. So we'll kind of have a recap of district golf for you next week. And like so many sports, it's just hard for the teams up north to go down and compete with the Boise schools when it comes to golf, especially. But you never know. We'll have to wait and see. Coeur d'Alene always has a really good outfit, and so does Moscow.
Yeah. And Lewiston, once in a while, they come away with a couple of kids that can, swing the sticks. I mean, Lewiston's a year-round golf town, so you kind of get away with some stuff there. But no, the courses here, I mean, we do like a weather report, and this is extremely amateur, but it's been raining most of the morning. But the greens here hold water so well, and it's been a relatively dryish end of the summer. So it's only, I think, our second day of rain in this month. So the greens and fairways should be in pretty good shape. I think that even they could probably get it in this afternoon if it rolls through. So
definitely. So we'll have a complete report for you on next week's edition of the Prepcast. So
yeah, I'll do the weather report for tomorrow too. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you give me the 5-day forecast? All right.
Eventually, maybe we'll get there. Pay me a little bit more.
Right. That's not in the job description.
It'll cost you. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's edition of the North Idaho Prepcast. Stay dry, everybody up there, up in the north, and enjoy the competitions this weekend. For Ryan Scaggs, I'm Brandon Baney, and we'll see you back here next week for another edition of the North Idaho Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.